We've made it to the Johto Elite Four, starting with Will. He wears a dumb mask and it's hard to take him seriously as a character. For Will, we're going to be starting with Natu. This one is from Skyridge. Its first attack foresight is pretty fun. You're not really going to be able to disrupt your opponent with it because right after you use it, they're going to draw their card per turn and then probably pay a bill. So they're not really going to be missing out on anything. They're going to get those cards, but at least by using Foresight, you know exactly what 3 cards they drew. So a playset of Natu and a playset of Xatu. We're not really going to be utilizing its Pokebody. That's a different deck, meant more for E-card. Instead, we're going to be utilizing Warpole to deal a decent chunk of damage and also recycle energy cards from the discard back into our deck. But Warpole lets you grab any card from your discard, which is very useful, and you know what card you're going to be drawing on your next turn because Warpole is going to put it on the top of the deck for you. For Executes, I couldn't decide which one I liked more for this deck, so I just did a 2-2. That way I can fit both of them in here. Continuous Explosion is a fun attack, but Growth Spurt has great synergy with what the deck is trying to accomplish, which is powering up these Exeggutors. Because when your Pokemon are loaded up with lots and lots of energy, this Exeggutor can deal some massive damage. Either with Big Explosion or with Lateral Explosion, just depending on how much energy you have attached and what the opposing side of the field looks like. This is a powerful card in general, especially so in a limited theme deck format like this. It's going to be paired with Dark Exeggutor, a card that I've not used in previous decks, and the reason I included this one is because throughout these theme decks I've been creating, there's a lot of energy removal, and this Dark Exeggutor is there to kind of clean up where the other Exeggutor lacks if the energy keep getting knocked off of it, because Max Burst, its damage is based off of how many energy are attached to your opponent's Pokemon. So if they're just discarding your energy and attaching to their own Pokemon, you can get some revenge with Dark Exeggutor's Max Burst, or at the very least, attack for only 1 colorless energy. Legendary Collection Jinx is just going to serve as the cleanup Pokemon. Meditate is a great attack late game because it's going to be able to hit all of those Pokemon that just have damage counters on them that haven't quite made it to KOs. But then Jinx comes in with Meditate and just goes, yep, all those damage counters, they're just going to work against you now. I'm going to start wiping out your Pokemon one after the other. So this deck does need a lot of energy moving from your deck into your hand, as well as from the discard back into your deck, just to keep it going through the mid to late game. In order to help with that, our draw power is going to be coming from 3 copies of Bill, 2 copies of Copycat, and 2 copies of Professor Elm. When you pair it with search cards that are going to show up in this deck, like Pokemon Fan Club and Master Ball, they're going to allow you to get whatever you need to get your setup as you need it. You do want, at least one Natu down on the bench, evolved up into Xatu as quickly as possible, just so you can get that recycling going on, whenever you need it. Dealing that 30 damage is also going to help finish some Pokemon off. But the Exeggutors do take a bit of time to set up, and there will be spaces between Exeggutor attacks where you need to set up again, and that's where Xatu is going to be able to come in and help recycle some of your discard. Or you can alternatively swap in a Jinx just to finish off an opposing Pokemon, like I said, depending on what the opposing side of the field looks like. Investing that much energy into these Exeggutor means that you want to keep them alive for as long as possible, which is why we're using a full playset of Goldberry. That way, between turns, you're able to heal off damage, keep those Exeggutor alive. It's going to be especially tough for Dark Exeggutor, just because it's got that low HP, as most Dark Pokemon do. You also want to make sure that your energy investment is getting you key KOs, in particular OHKOs. So you want to be able to sweep out your opponent's Pokemon as often as possible. That way you're kind of forcing them to move Pokemon that they have retreated to the bench because of damage counters back into the active position. Double Gust is going to be another one of those key cards that you are targeting with Warpole to put on the top of your deck, because that's going to be very scary to your opponent when, they may know that you're only playing 3 copies in the deck, but because of Warpole, you could just play as many copies as you want, turn after turn, continuously pulling Pokemon from the bench to hit with a Jinx or an Exeggutor on the next turn. Speaking of recycling, we're going to have 1 copy of Town Volunteers just to help out in case you don't have the 3 energy attached to Xatu to use Warpole and then 4 copies of Recycle Energy, just so if the Pokemon gets knocked out, you do have a constant source of energy returning to your hand. Boost Energy is going to be a heavy drop card. Whenever you are dropping this card, you're going to be dropping it onto Xatu in order to instantly power it up straight off the bench with no energy attached to use Warpole, dealing 30 damage and setting yourself up for something nice next turn. But it's also going to help tremendously boost one of those Aquapolis Exeggutor. That's going to give you 3 extra coin flips, up to 60 additional damage for the turn, which is huge. Not to mention that Boost Energy is another card that Xatu can place on the top of your deck again. That way you can just boost energy turn after turn after turn, and your opponent can't do anything about it except try to get rid of the Xatu so it can't Warpole anymore. And yes, I know, you have to flip a coin for Warpole, so it's not as easy as just using it and getting a card back, but 50% of the time you're going to be able to, and typically, if Xatu is in the active position, you're going to be able to use it at least a couple of times. Ideally, you are starting the game with either of the Execute. I don't think it really matters, but having the Growth Spurt, wanting the active position, starting the game does really help get that synergy started early. And I think that all of these Pokemon, even though I had to pick them from, you know, Will's Pokemon, I think they all have some pretty good synergy with one another. And that this deck does feel like a bit of a step up from the Gym Leader decks that we've already done, which is one of the goals I was trying to accomplish, is having the decks be progressively better to kind of match the in-game lore of progressively more challenging character battles. For alternate Xatu, the Genesis one isn't great. The Discovery one can deal a decent chunk of damage, 50 for 3 energy, but it's still off of a stage 1, and Jynx can do pretty much the same mid to late game for 3 energy, and it's a basic Pokemon, so it takes up less space in your deck. Speaking of Jynx, there is an Aquapolis Jynx that can meditate for only 2 energy, the trade-off being that this Jynx has 60 HP instead of 70, and when this one meditates, it's 10 plus 10 for each additional damage counter, where that base set reprint from Legendary Collection does 20 plus 10 more. So I'm not saying one's better than the other. You can definitely swap these out without much of a fuss. I just like that base set one better because of the extra 10 HP. What else does Will's team have on offer? Well, we can definitely take a look at any Psychic type Slowbro. Running the Dark Slowbro from Legendary Collection would potentially give you a reason to run Rocket's Hideout. That way both Dark Slowbro and Dark Exeggutor could get some HP boost. Fickle Attack isn't really worth adding the Slowbro to the deck for. Yeah, it's a good Haymaker attack if it lands, which is going to be about 50% of the time. Its real in power could potentially help with the recycling gimmick of the deck, but I think this just ends up filling up a bunch of space that other Pokemon deserve more. We could also take a look at any Kadabra or Girafarig from Will's round 1 team. In round 2 he has access to Hypno as well, so let's take a look at all 3. With LC Kadabra, we again see a pretty solid 50 damage attack coming off of a stage 1 Pokemon for 3 energy, but again, Jynx is already going to be able to do this for the same amount of energy while taking up less space. The same can kind of be said for Skyridge Kadabra. There's not going to be a lot of opportunities you're really looking for to where you're trying to hit something with Psychic resistance for full damage. The 3 Girafarig are decent enough, but don't really add anything to the deck. If I was going to slot one in, it would probably be the one from Genesis, just because I feel that 20 damage and potential for confusion is pretty good for 2 energy. The Neo Destiny one can also deal some decent damage for 2 energy, but I would rather have a Pokemon that can hit for weakness, and anything that's normal type can't. Hypno, on the other hand, though, 90 HP on a stage 1, can deal a decent chunk of damage for 3 energy with Dark Mind, but also do a little bit of chip damage to the bench. Now that one is a little more enticing. Aquapolis Hypno is just massively underrated for what it can do in the right format. The problem with a lot of these cards, but Hypno in particular since it's on the screen right now, is that just Exeggutor is a stage 1 that can do a lot more with the resources available, especially boost energy. And in Pokemon, I always value synergy over just cool cards that do cool stuff. When you have cards like Exeggutor and Dark Exeggutor that can offer both with the types of energy and support Pokemon you have, there's really no reason to pick anything else over them. But that is the Will deck. I am very happy with the way it turned out, given the types of Pokemon I had to work with here. I think a did a pretty solid job in not only providing a decent theme deck for the character Will, but also ramping up the competitive viability a bit to match the fact that Will is an Elite Four member. Whether you agree or disagree, let me know down in the comments. Let me know what types of combos or specific Pokemon you would have used yourself. And let me know what types of theme decks or just decks in general you'd like to see on the channel in the future. Thank you so much for watching. Social media links are down in the description. I'll see you next video.